Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video, and I've been playing against some of the best players Cataclysm Arena has to offer over the past day since the season has started, and I wanted to release my Balanced Druid guide to go over absolutely everything that you need to know in order to start succeeding and start pwning. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, for Balanced Druid specifically, the main problems I'm experiencing so far have been oriented around mana. So we'll first take a look at the talent tree to show you what exactly is going down and what it is exactly that I am trying to accomplish. So you're going to notice that we are not taking any points in Starlight Wrath for the reduction in cast, and this is because you need to allocate pretty much every talent point to anything oriented with mana, something like Moonglow to reduce the mana cost of your damage and healing spells, Euphoria to guarantee that you're restoring mana every time you get into Eclipse, and Dream State in order to get the maximum value of Innervate mana from yourself, and particularly this talent, Furor, which is going to increase your maximum mana by 15%. Now you can see with 15% mana increase, these are all based off your percent mana total. When you enter Eclipse, you'll get 16% of your total mana. Innervate will give you 30% of your total mana over its duration. Innervate just baseline gives you percent total of your mana. So if you want to make sure that you're not running out of mana, I would highly recommend this build. This also gives your build a bit of flexibility as far as being able to go cat form and having energy to use things like Skull Bash or Stampeding Roar in order to kite away from enemy attackers. And the same basically goes for bear form. It guarantees that you have rage to use bash when you shapeshift into bear. So there is some overall, damage output and mana value as well as utility that comes from this. And I've been enjoying it a lot more specifically than Blessing of the Grove, which I would probably take in battleground scenarios. This is just going to give you more direct Moonfire damage. And in battlegrounds, you're going to be spamming Moonfire way more successfully than you are going to be able to in Arena, because in Arena, you're going to be dropping your stacks, which come from Lunar Shower, which is a core component of basically just spamming Moonfire, stacking this up and doing as much damage as possible. But this is going to fall off anytime you're CC'd. It's going to fall off anytime you're trying to do anything other than spam Moonfire, which in Arena is going to be a lot more frequently than you would really expect. So the direct damage from Moonfire, I think, is lower value than making sure that you have a less opportunity to run out of mana, because if you do, you just become completely useless in that regard. So do focus your talent tree around this. You can just copy the build over. You do want to focus around fungal growth and mushrooms a lot. It's really important for getting control, as well as Starfall. So Starfall is going to be a huge amount of your damage. Obviously, it's the capstone of the talent tree. We're running Heart of the Wild again for increased intellect and increased stamina, survivability, and damage. You really can't ask for much more value from this. And then obviously we've got Master Shapeshifter for 4% more damage in Moonfire or Moonkin form to maximize our damage. So I've really been liking this build. We don't run the extended range on Cyclone or damage increase on Typhoon. I found that Cyclone's range, even at 25, has been decently far enough range for me to pretty much get a clone anytime that I've needed it, and it's not worth losing out on something that's going to make me run out of mana faster. I only run 1 point into the Alkin Frenzy because it's going to be about the same proc no matter what as you're getting attacked, and it's the same damage increase regardless of how many points that you put into it. Now, another little tip that you can do is that you can use Wild Mushrooms to apply Earth and Moon. This is how we're going to get around not having Starlight Wrath. So instead of casting a Wrath to apply our damage increasing effect, we're just going to use a Mushroom and explode it. We'll get the snare on the ground and the benefit of the Earth and Moon and its instant cast. So this is just a really good way to get around that without needing Starlight Wrath specifically, so we can get all of the mana-oriented talents. Now, as far as gear is concerned, your main focus is going to be obviously intellect. You want to make sure that you get your hit cap, which is about 4%. I've got to adjust my spell penetration a little bit. I haven't noticed this amount being too bad, but I think you want to be ideally around like 190 spell penetration, around 4% spell hit. Everything else needs to be intellect. You want to try and get as close to around, I think it's around 11% haste for a break point, which is going to give you an extra couple of dot ticks, which is really important. And haste is just going to make casting Cyclone a lot better, casting Regrowth to help out your team. So haste is really desirable. And then obviously mastery following that, and then it's going to be crit. So we can see on the gear, we've got intellect meta gem for maxing out our intellect red gems, intellect enchants, haste off pieces as we can get them. Once again, I've got intellect haste here. You could switch this for pure intellect, but the reason that I've done this is trying to get closer to the 11% breakpoint on haste. You can look up the breakpoint on Google. There's a few of them, and your haste is obviously going to change depending on if you're a Moonkin form. It's going to change depending on if you've got your Nature's Grace, which I can't apply because I just attacked the mob earlier. But you've got a bunch of different haste modifiers that are going to push you over different haste breakpoints that are important to know so that you can, cap out on the maximum amount of damage. We run the spell penetration cloak. This is going to get you, the significant amount of your spell penetration. I just got to cycle out one of my blue gems for a spell pen gem to hit the cap, basically. Intellect haste to make sure we get to the cap. Resil enchant. We've got spell power at the moment on our bracers. Mastery reforged into haste. We've got a heroic weapon. Ideally, I think Soul Releaser is really good for like the initial PvP weapon. Obviously, we're going to get the conquest weapon as soon as possible, but this one's nice because it gives you spirit and haste to get you to the hit cap, and you can see I'm as close to 4% without going hugely over it to maximize my stats in other locations. We got Hurricane Enchant because it's cheaper than Power Torrent at the moment. I'm not going to put Power Torrent on anything until the prices drop, or until we have a tier 2 weapon that's worth putting it on. Intellect Gems, Spirit reforged into haste, but not going underneath 4% hit rating. Haste Enchant onto gloves to try and get us to those haste break points. We've got, I could add a belt buckle here onto this again. I'm kind of saving gold because this is blue PvP gear. If you really have got gold to splurge on a blue PvP gear, then you can obviously buy the extra socket for this one. For pants, double intellect gem, kind of cheap leg enchant. I'm honestly working on leveling my tailoring, and I'm thinking about postponing that a little bit till the prices drop again for that, because I haven't noticed it making a big difference. I've been fighting boomkins that have min-max archaeology staff volcano decks, and I'm doing about as much damage, sometimes out damaging them. So that little minor of a difference isn't worth me going completely broke at the bank to get enchants on. And then boots, who are obviously minor movement speed and stamina at the moment, and like haste to get to that haste breakpoint as much as we can. We've got the crit ring for now. Obviously, ideally, I think there's a dungeon ring that's epic. It's not going to be a big deal because we're going to replace this really quickly with how high conquest is. So we can just swap this into the spirit one in just a moment. But it may be the case that we want a PvE second ring, because the PvP rings aren't really that well itemized, and the vendors are gone, or else I would show you that because they deleted the vendors when the conquest wasn't capped properly. But the crit ring's not terrible. You just reforge it into haste. It's a decent amount of resil, obviously. And then the spirit ring for the hit cap, reforged into haste. We've got our medallion, obviously, so we can escape crowd control. And I think, honestly, this trinket has been surprisingly good for the early season. And basically why this trinket is good, the Sorrow Song, is that it has a 10-second cooldown. So one of the biggest problems for Boomkin is finishing power, which is closing the game out, and this will trigger when targets are low health, giving you a big boost of spell power to snapshot all your dots when they're at their lowest health, which actually gives you a decent amount to be able to run them over, and you can reforge the mastery into haste. But I've also been dying in a few games as well, so I've been considering switching this one out just for a resil proc trinket and then trying to measure them up side by side. But I've surprisingly been liking this one. I think Volcano deck is also a decent pickup, and then Battle Master, if you can somehow know the matchup, like it's going to be a rogue targeting you, I think Battle Master can be particularly good. But the resil proc trinket is kind of the safest option. It's guaranteed to get. You don't have to worry about RNG drops from dungeons, and obviously this trinket's going to fall off when we're able to get the conquest trinkets given their item level boost, but this one has been actually kind of pretty good here initially. So let's just jump into some gameplay. I've got a VOD here for us to be able to go over, and we can go over like what exactly it is that you're trying to do in the arena match specifically. Your main goal is to maintain dots on as many targets as possible. This is going to give you shooting stars procs, which are instant star surges. That's your hardest hitting attack. Generally speaking, you want to starfall almost on cooldown at the beginning so you can get it off cooldown by the time you get into lunar eclipse. We'll start in stealth with sprint, and we'll dash towards the center of the map. This is a bit of a weird start. You can kind of just YOLO Typhoon if you want to try and pull the rogue out. It can be really tough though. I see a sap and we get Rain of Fire. So we're going to get immediately into Moonkin forms, the damage reduction, try and Typhoon the rogue out and move away from the priest who's sapped, because the rogue has to travel from the priest to be able to get to us, and they might get knocked out or they won't open on us while our healer is CC'd. So this kind of like blocks them from opening. We can get dots rolling out onto targets while they're just sitting behind the pillar. Mushrooms for that earth and moon. You generally want to explode the mushroom before dotting just because it'll snapshot the 8%, but you're not going to always get it ideally. The fire mage is going to be resetting ignite constantly though, so that 8% will be really good benefits towards your partners if you're running with a caster. And we've got the enemy team pinned at the bottom side of the pillar, so I'd like taking the high ground advantage, not running in against rogues particularly because you just take so much damage. I'm going to try and go for cyclones. If we get kicked, it's not a big deal. We can just cast Star Surge, or we can start spamming Moonfire again onto any targets that they've gotten. Whenever you got free time, you basically are just going to spam Moonfire, keep Earth Moon up with Wild Mushrooms, and just keep spamming Moonfire on anything that moves into your line of sight. We're not going to be hard casting spells. We're not running the Starlight Wrath. It's going to be too inefficient. I see an opportunity to kick the Shaman here. here, so I'm going to kick him with mushrooms, snaring him in that solar beam. We got rot pressure, and look at that, because we starfalled early, we got a starfall for our lunar eclipse, which is the ideal situation to use your second starfall, which is forcing them to hide behind the pillar. We can wild mushroom behind the pillar, dot up pets, really important to dot up pets. With a fire mage, you want to coordinate your dragon's breath. They're probably going to give you a 2-second countdown timer because you don't want to spam moonfire and break it. It can be harder to do damage in this composition because of that, but after that DB, we're going to immediately just go spamming dots once again, reposition, still out of range of the rogue, but close enough that I can dot everything while spam attacking the healer as much as possible. It's really important to keep dots onto the healers when they're resto shamans. Here a smoke bomb comes down, and tranquility is really good tech against smoke bomb. It'll heal through line of sight. It's a really powerful healing Cataclysm, so I usually time it in those moments or if I'm behind a pillar. But then we're just going to continue to proc. We've been maintaining our dots, keeping up our mushrooms, and we just Star Surge bop the lock out of the game, almost get a triple kill at this point in the round, and feel pretty happy about our success. So it is pretty straightforward as far as just keep the dots up, look for opportunities to clone when you can, try and land interrupts onto enemy healers with your solar beam. You can also use solar beam to stop CC on your healer when you know that's going to be like a critical situation like a fear or something like that. You can use root beam. Problem with casted root beam is that there's a bit of delay on the root itself, where the healer actually has a second to be able to dispel themselves. We can also see the Sour Song trinket here, the 6-second duration right when they got low. It just boosts up your damage and lets you get a lot of finishing power. That's why I really like this trinket in these scenarios. I actually maybe thinking about farming the heroic version of it at the moment, but I also kind of want more Resil, because sometimes this team will try and target me more frequently. I think their opener kind of got scuffed on this round specifically, but you get focused a lot, so the Resil might actually be necessary. You can also use pre-thorns whenever you're going to run in on top of the rogue or any melee DPS is next to them. You can see thorns up while I was pushing in for the kill onto the lock. This is a good way to kind of like neglect and reflect people from attacking you at that moment in time. It's just all about maximizing the damage, spamming Moonfire to get yourself into Eclipse in order to really blast out as much damage as possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed this Cataclysm balance tier guide. I'm going to be playing a lot of Cataclysm, I think, here, as well as retail. So if you're interested in that type of content, make sure to smash the subscribe button. As always, thank you for your support, and I hope that this video was helpful.